just trying to give your tax dollars to criminals, they're spending literally trillions of dollars when you add it up, trillions of dollars on bombs and tax breaks for billionaires. And what do Americans get in return? Higher bills, benefits that have been gutted, and a tab that they never agreed to pick up. While the Trump administration is busy cashing in, people working, the so-called working people of America, are facing a cost of living emergency. The president's war in Iran, this war of choice, is sending costs through the roof. The costs are already adding up. On energy alone, Americans have spent an average of $450 per person more since the start of this war. Gas in Colorado is now roughly $4.50 a gallon. And before the year is out, American groceries will spend hundreds of dollars more than they would have before just on groceries. Here's how bad it's gotten. Americans now carry a record $1.25 trillion credit card debt. That's the highest level since the stock market crash in 2008. That's the equivalent of every single American owing $3,600. That's not a working class that's thriving. That's one that's barely surviving. And here's the cruel reality. People are working harder than ever. Coloradans are doing everything they can to hold up their end of the bargain. Long days, multiple jobs, paying taxes. But the more they contribute, the less they get back, the less they get in return. And there's a clear explanation for this. The president doled out roughly $4 trillion in tax breaks, that's over 10 years, but roughly $4 trillion in tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans so that the largest corporations, so the wealthiest individuals like him, can skip their taxes. And to pay for it, they slashed, over 10 years, but they slashed $1 trillion from the health care of Americans. That's astounding. Trump's tariffs generated $133 billion. Nearly every dollar came right out of the pocket of Americans' consumers' pockets, an average of more than $1,000 a person. Now, the Supreme Court ruled that these tariffs are illegal, and a federal court ordered the administration to repay American businesses. Has the government responded? Have they complied? No, of course not. They're using every excuse they can to resist. They have failed to pay back the $166 billion that they owe. Even worse, just yesterday, President Trump announced new tariffs on 59 countries in addition to the European Union. When they're not busy taxing Americans, the Trump administration is pouring hundreds of millions into this new ballroom. Meanwhile, 9,000 families in Colorado just lost their SNAP benefits. That's their food stamps, their nutrition. Our economy is leaving too many Americans behind. Just talk to Leah, a young woman I met recently at a healthcare roundtable in Colorado Springs. She's the full-time medical caregiver for her daughter, Victoria, who was diagnosed as a baby with spina bifida. Now, Victoria is a paraplegic, fed through a tube, requires a ventilator. Leah works around the clock to keep her child alive. That hard work is about to get even harder. This year, Leah's income will be cut by 40% as a direct result of this administration's Medicaid cuts. That cut puts her daughter's life at risk. The Trump administration claims these Medicaid cuts are about preventing graft and fraud. But there's clearly no fraud whatsoever in a mother doing everything she can trying to keep her child alive. Leah doesn't even know if they'll be able to keep their house, whether they'll have enough money to make their payments. That house that's been specifically fitted to take care of Victoria's needs. Without Leah's around-the-clock care, Victoria would have to be institutionalized in an acute care facility at a dramatically higher cost. Now that's waste. It might not be fraud, but that's waste. Leah is living every parent's worst nightmare. She works as hard as she possibly can every day to try and keep her child alive. And now it's still not enough. So many Americans are living with these kinds of fears. At a local nonprofit in Boulder, I take that back, at a local nonprofit in Denver, I met a woman named Brittany who told me that healthcare is one of her biggest stressors, one of the major things that causes her emotional stress. Brittany's daughter recently had a severe asthma attack. Brittany watched her daughter gasp for breath, begin to turn blue. In that split second, she faced a second fear. Should she rush her daughter to the hospital herself and risk the drive with no one to care for the daughter, or call an ambulance, which she knew she wouldn't be able to afford? It's a fear no parent should have to live with. The Trump administration made it a reality because they chose these tax breaks for the wealthiest people in this country, many of whom, if not most of whom, don't even want the tax breaks. But they chose tax breaks for these billionaires over health care for working people. At another event in Denver, I met Louisa, who spends $90 a week on gas as she drives 28 miles to work and home every day. She had moved further from Denver because the housing was more affordable. Now she wonders if she made the right choice. Louisa is watching costs increase while she takes home less every week. She does everything she can to insulate her kids from fear, from her fear. On weekends, she tries to take her kids to the park right about lunchtime. She hopes they're too busy playing to remember how hungry they are. As she says, it's one less meal to buy. Our country is measured in these moments. The way we care for the most vulnerable. The life or death journey between the house and the hospital. The cost to fill an empty refrigerator. By every measure, our president, President Trump, is failing. He's run up costs, he's paid himself and his friends, and he's stuck Americans with the tab. He's waiting for Americans to pay the bill. This is the moment where we decide whether that is acceptable. Whether the people who work the hardest, already pay the most, and ask for the least, finally get a country that works for them. It's a question that echoes throughout our entire history, one that built the civil rights movement, women's suffrage, and the long fight for workers to have a seat at the table. At its core, it's an American question. Who does this country actually work for? This administration has given their answer to Coloradans. Leah from Colorado Springs will lose close to $80,000 in support. Brittany calculates the cost of an ambulance while her daughter is turning blue, can't breathe. Louisa hopes her kids will not remember that they're hungry. Americans fund the system, and Trump takes billions for himself, and Americans get the shaft. We know there's a better way. Americans have held up their end of the bargain long enough. Long days and multiple jobs, the taxes paid over long periods of time. They've earned more than a slush fund for felons, more than a government that builds ballrooms while 9,000 Coloradans lose their groceries. And these are families that are struggling to put food on the table. It's more than an administration that takes everything and returns nothing. Now, we've introduced an amendment to stop election criminals like Tina Peters from getting a dime of your taxpayer dollars. Soon, Republicans are going to be forced to vote on it. So while hardworking Americans struggle with rising costs, those who undermine our elections are the last people our government should subsidize, the last people that should ever get your hard-earned tax dollars. We need to put an end to the slush fund. We need to put that end in writing so the Trump administration can't change their mind later on. Working Americans have paid in too long to keep getting played, and we will fight tooth and nail to make sure they get what they're owed. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I begin my remarks that I wanted to speak on today about law and order, I do have a couple of comments I wanted to make that came to mind as my colleague was speaking. You know, Mr. President, I think that they are suffering not only from Trump derangement syndrome, but a little bit of Democrat amnesia. I think they have forgotten that under Joe Biden, inflation hit 9%. It was the highest it had been in over 4 decades. They didn't seem to be concerned about cost or affordability, and every single day, Republicans work to get down the cost of gas and groceries. Every single day, we work on affordability. Even a year ago, we had not one single colleague from the other side of the aisle, Mr. President, not one, vote for the working families tax cut, big, beautiful bill. They all voted against it because they wanted a $4 trillion tax hike. Now, why did my colleagues on the other side of the aisle vote in lockstep, every single Democrat? They want more money, more of your money that they can spend. They want to control it. They want you to give them the power so they can micromanage your life. Inflation, they're all for it. When you talk about prices going up, they're all for it. Even Barack Obama said, oh, your electric bills are necessarily going to go up because I'm pushing the Green New Deal. And boy, did they ever. So I think that it's interesting, and I wish that they would actually focus on the issue of affordability, and I wish they would actually work with us when it comes to getting costs down, but they don't, because they want more of your money. Isn't it so interesting? They never get enough of the taxpayers' money. It is a gimme, gimme, gimme every single day. Money and power, they're all about it. I do want to talk this afternoon, Mr. President, about a core responsibility of any representative government, and that is the responsibility to enforce the rule of law. Now, questions that responsible governments will ask themselves is, can we protect law-abiding citizens? Can we make certain that our citizens are protected from criminals? How do we get our crime rate down in our communities? How do we maintain law and order? can we make certain that we're enacting justice and we're punishing lawbreakers? Now, this is something that we as Republicans believe is a basic responsibility. But, Mr. President, it has become painfully clear, and I think it should be regrettable, that our colleagues across the aisle do not see this as a basic responsibility. They're for sanctuary cities. They're for trying to make illegal legal. They put the interest and the needs of illegal aliens in front of the needs of law-abiding citizens. Every single federal immigration law that we have on the books, every single one of them was passed by Congress, and that law was signed into law by a sitting U.S. president. Now, some of those were Republican, some were Democrat. And it's important to note that these laws actually reflect the will of the American people, and these immigration laws are just as legitimate as any other law that is on the books. Every one of them. They are legitimate. But what we have come to know over the last few years is that our Democrat colleagues, many of them, see these laws as optional. Many of them do not think we should have a border. They think we should have an open border, and we saw what that did under President Biden when he laid out the welcome mat. And you had millions of illegal aliens flooding our country and overwhelming our communities. And when we went to the southern border to visit, we realized they were covered up with illegal aliens. Crime rates were soaring. Indeed, Mr. President, we saw across this country every state become a border state, every town become a border town. And we're seeing once again that our colleagues across the aisle are doubling down on putting illegal aliens and their interest in front of American citizens. I don't think you see this in any other country on the face of the earth. But for some reason, they've gotten it in their mind that they need to take care of those that are illegally in the country, and they should put the welcome mat out for them. And of course, what we have learned, as you look at the drug traffickers, the sex traffickers, the human traffickers, this is one of the most uncompassionate policies ever. The horror stories of what have been done to women and girls and children, absolutely horrific. But that wasn't enough for our friends across the aisle. So for 76 days, the Democrats kept the Department of Homeland Security shut down. They left the Secret Service, the Coast Guard, FEMA, TSA, other critical agencies unfunded because they wanted to score political points with the radical left. They just tossed them aside. Can you imagine being told, we're going to use you as a pawn? You're not going to get a paycheck? Absolutely astounding. Now, in Tennessee, I've done so many meetings in communities across the state, and I've done a lot of telephone town halls, and I did one last night what you hear from people in these town halls is, what do the Democrats think they are doing? Why? Why? At a time when there are so many threats, why would they jeopardize our nation's security? Well, as I said last night on the telephone town hall, the Democrats have a goal. They've been committed to this for years, and they've not been able to pull it off. So they've got a new way of doing it, and it's called, let's just shut down Homeland Security. Their goal is to defund law enforcement and to abolish ICE. And I've got a chart, Mr. President, that shows some of the statements that have come from people on the left, from the Democrats. Here you've got Rep. Omar, abolish ICE. Rep. Mark Pocan, abolishing ICE. Isn't that radical? Imagine that, doing away with law enforcement, not radical. You've got another one, Ramirez, and she's saying abolish ICE, dismantle DHS. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, abolish ICE. Jim McGovern, abolish ICE. See, the list goes on and on. You have some of our Senate colleagues. We need to abolish ICE, replace ICE, abolish ICE. This is what they are trying to do. ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And when you hear all of these statements, not one more dollar for ICE, they say. ICE is beyond reform, they say. They even say abolishing ICE isn't radical. And they continue to push to abolish ICE. Now, the sad thing, in my opinion, is that this isn't a fringe position in today's Democrat Party. It has become a mainstay of their political agenda. Can you even imagine the chaos that would ensue if we wiped this agency, which is responsible for protecting Americans from cross-border crime and illegal immigration, if we wiped that agency off the map? There would be more crime, more sex trafficking, drug trafficking, more human trafficking, more terrorism, and more lives lost. Since President Trump returned to office, we've seen the consequences of this rhetoric on full display. You can look at what is unfolding right now in New Jersey. For days, far-left rioters have assaulted law enforcement outside Delaney Hall, which is an immigration detention facility near Newark. By all appearances, these are professional protesters, and yes, indeed, we've all seen them. We see them in the halls of these buildings. We see them out on the sidewalks. They are paid professional protesters. That is their job. Outside the facility, they've set up entire supply stations with masks, hard hats, goggles, duct tape. This didn't just drop out of the air and land there on a table. It was purchased. Makes you wonder, who's paying for all of this, for people to be out there being paid to be a protester? Now, the New Jersey State Attorney General even admitted that most of the arrested rioters were, guess what? They're from outside New Jersey. Like I said, paid political protesters. Some of these paid political protesters have thrown rocks at officers. Others have pushed barricades at the police. One rioter screamed at an ICE agent, and I quote, "Your children, your wife, all dead. I have your face. You're dead," end quote. Imagine if that were being shouted at you as you did your job. Imagine if somebody was screaming at you that they were going to kill your kids, and they were going to kill your wife, and they were going to kill you. They had your face. They knew who you were. This is what these agents are facing. Nothing compassionate about that, is it? Of course not. Absolutely not. The death threats to ICE agents, they're up 8,000%. The assaults on ICE agents are up 1,300%. And as I said at the beginning of my remarks, Mr. President, what they're doing is enforcing the rule of law. They're enforcing laws that this body has passed, and a sitting U.S. president has affixed his signature and signed that law. But no, we have colleagues across the aisle that are saying, we don't like that one, so let's just not enforce it. I think that is sick, because instead of condemning the violence, you've got the state's, New Jersey's governor, Democrat, has stood shoulder to shoulder with the rioters. After days of clashes, she sent state police to secure the area, not to ensure the safety of federal law enforcement, but, and I'm quoting her in her words, to, and I quote, avoid escalation from ICE, end quote. See what she is doing there? She is blaming the ICE officers who are abiding by the rule of law. She is not blaming the paid political protesters who are not peacefully protesting. They are there shouting. They've got their hard hats. They've got their signs. They've thrown rocks. Now she's citing the unrest to call for the closure of Delaney Hall. This is how radical Democrats have become. They will allow organized mobs to assault our federal law enforcement, and then they'll cite that violence as a reason to stop law enforcement from doing their jobs. While the Democrats try to abolish ICE, Republicans are doing everything possible to uphold the rule of law. It's why we are moving forward with a public security reconciliation bill that will provide the funding necessary for ICE and CBP for years to come. As I said, we're doing this through reconciliation. That is the same process we used to pass the working families tax cuts. And I remind you again, not one single Democrat voted for the tax cuts. They wanted the $4 trillion tax hike so that they could have more of your money. What we're saying is, come on, join us. Vote for this reconciliation bill. Let's fund these vital agencies by a simple majority vote. There are plenty of bills that I and others have put into place that we should pass and make certain that we deal with this issue of illegal immigration and that we support our men and women that are working with DHS. This bill is going to come before us today and tomorrow. I encourage swift passage, And I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Ms. Alster-Brooks.
I was waiting. Senator from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, we're back. We're back to finish the
Senator,
job.
it's a quorum call, excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. President, I would ask for unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're back. We're back to finish the job now to make sure that ICE and CBP has the funding it needs to carry out the mission we've set out in federal immigration law. There was a time where this wasn't controversial. There was a time when Democrat presidents actually gave speeches about our border and making sure that we deported people who were here illegally. But that's a long time ago now. The Democrats have made their central plank of everything that they hold on to in this town about open borders, mass migration, and anti-law enforcement. We saw this iteration with the defund the police movement. It simply gravitated to the defund ICE movement. They don't actually think, as a sovereign country, we should be able to tell people who can come in, how long they can stay, and when they have to leave. This is a fundamental issue for a sovereign nation. And so we're back now on reconciliation once again to make sure that their operations are indeed funded. I won't even get into the idea of what a departure from the norms this has been to, for a policy reason, to hold up an appropriation. But that's what happened. But now through the process of reconciliation, Republicans are going to right that wrong, get this right, and the Democrats, they can talk all day long about how they don't want to deport criminal illegal aliens, because that's really what this is about. And I also want to tell the truth about something else very plainly. Mass migration drove up the cost of living for the American people. More deportations will bring that down. For years, Washington treated immigration as a border issue alone. It is that, but it's also a pocketbook issue. It shows up in rent, wages, down payments, crowded schools, strained hospitals, and city budgets buckling under the policies their citizens never voted for. Illegal aliens do not stay at the border. They went to New York City, Chicago, Denver, towns and suburbs all across this country, into the same labor markets, housing markets, classrooms, emergency rooms, and public benefit systems already under strain. Americans are forced into a bidding war with the entire world. Teenagers looking for a summer job, young couples trying to buy their first home, families trying to make rent, workers trying to get a raise. All of them are told to compete with millions of new arrivals, many here in violation of our laws. This was a policy of choice. Washington flooded the labor market with workers and the housing market with renters at the same time. The result was exactly what any honest economist would predict: lower wages, higher rents, higher income, higher home prices, higher taxes, a weaker American middle class. From 2021 to 2024, more than 20 million people came into the United States, the largest short-term surge in American history. During that same period, rents skyrocketed, housing prices surged, and communities were priced out of their own neighborhoods. The United States is short roughly 10 million homes. Washington imported millions and millions and millions of people into that shortage and then acted surprised when prices went up. There's nothing mysterious about this. Add millions of renters to a tight housing market and rents rise. Add millions of buyers and home prices rise. Make housing unaffordable and family formation gets delayed. Since 2010, the median age of the first-time homebuyer in this country has gone from 30 years old to 40 years old. The median down payment for a first home buyer now is more than $40,000. That's way more than the median net worth of Americans under 35. A young American couple can work hard, save money, follow the rules, and try to start a family. Washington's answer is to make them compete against a migration wave their own government invited, subsidized, and refused to remove. That is a betrayal. HUD's own report admits that immigration drove as much as 100% of rental price growth in states like California and New York, and roughly 2/3 of rental demand nationwide. The same thing is happening in the labor market. Over the last 25 years, immigrants accounted for nearly 3/4 of all growth in the prime age civilian labor force. Since 2019, the American-born workforce has not grown at all. Not at all. And since February 2020, roughly 90% of new jobs have gone to foreign-born workers. That is a labor market that Washington built. More workers for corporate America, more competition for American workers, more pressure on wages, and less bargaining power for citizens. The fiscal costs are staggering. A recent congressional study estimated the lifetime net fiscal cost to government at about $68,000 per illegal alien. But best estimates show deportation costs cost roughly $13,000 per removal. Deporting 10 million illegal aliens would save American taxpayers at least $500 billion. That money could be used and should be used to strengthen American households, schools, hospitals, police departments, and our neighborhoods. Instead, Americans are being taxed to subsidize lawbreaking. A country that does that has broken the faith of its own citizens. Look at New York City, Chicago, and Denver. Sanctuary politicians attacked immigration enforcement, declared themselves morally superior, and watched their budgets buckle. Services are strained. Citizens were told to accept less. When the bill came due, the same politicians demanded more money from taxpayers. That is the sanctuary city model. Benefits for illegal aliens, fiscal strain for citizens, and moral vanity masquerading as compassion. It is not compassion to make citizens finance their own dispossession. They call it compassion. They call it growth. Strip away the language and look at what the system does to real people. It lowers wages. It raises housing costs. It strains public services. It rewards lawbreaking. It transfers wealth away from citizens. It turns the American dream into a luxury good. So let's be clear about the alternative. If mass migration raises the cost of living, more deportations will lower it. Remove illegal workers from the labor market and wages will rise. Remove illegal renters from the housing market and rent pressure falls. Stop subsidizing lawbreaking and taxpayers save money. Enforce the law and citizenship starts to mean something again. The economy exists to serve the people of the nation. The people of the nation do not exist to serve the economy. For far too long, Washington inverted that principle. It built an economy for global capital instead of American citizens. It opened the border in the name of an ideology that treats America like a labor market with a flag attached to it. That experiment, ladies and gentlemen, has failed. It failed the people we represent. But this decline was chosen. What was chosen, though, can be reversed. We can secure the border. We can end mass migration. We can carry out more deportations. We can restore an economy that serves American citizens again. This fight is about whether Americans can afford to live in the country their ancestors built. It's about whether citizenship still carries a promise. It's about whether this nation remains a home for its very own people, and whether we're going to fight to make sure America remains a home for Americans. And now, for the first time in a generation, we have a chance to choose something different, to secure the border, to carry out these deportations, to restore sanity to the labor market, to bring down housing demand, to put American taxpayers first, and to rebuild an economy that serves the American people once again. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Senator from Minnesota is recognized.
thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to talk about Minnesota because the fight that is about to happen here on the Senate floor started far away from this place, on the streets of my home state. Tomorrow, Republicans in the Senate are going to force through a partisan bill to give ICE and Customs and Border Patrol almost $70 billion, all because they have refused to do anything to rein in the abuses of ICE, abuses that destroyed the trust, killed American citizens, and ripped Minnesota families apart. And so I want to take a moment to remind my colleagues of how we got to this moment. What happened was that masked and lawless federal police force occupied my state, kidnapping people in the street, tearing families apart, and committing terrible acts of violence. The entire country watched in horror. Your constituents watched. We watched Renee Good killed in her car after dropping her child off at school. We watched Alex Preddy swarmed by masked agents and then shot in the back and killed. We watched 5-year-old Liam Ramos in his bunny hat and his Spider-Man backpack separated from his father. And we bore witness to countless acts of violence captured on camera and many, many more that were hidden from public view. And across the country, it was impossible to look away as we watched our government terrorize people. But we also saw something exceptional, of course. We saw Minnesotans showing what resistance and what courage looks like. In sub-zero temperatures, Minnesotans met guns with whistles and came out to protect people that they didn't even know. Churches and neighbors organized mutual aid and delivered prescriptions to folks that couldn't leave their own homes. They drove kids to school and back again, and they coordinated food deliveries for people that were afraid to go to the grocery store. We marched thousands and thousands strong to demand that ICE get out of our state. And it worked, colleagues. History will remember that Minnesota won the battle of Operation Metro Surge, just as we get through the long, long, cold Minnesota winters, by showing up for our neighbors, no matter what our differences might be, by helping people that we don't even know, and by peacefully demanding justice and accountability. But that victory was not without a cost. The great damage done by this rogue, dangerous, secret police force is still felt in Minneapolis and in St. Paul. It's felt in Chicago and Los Angeles and Portland and in countless communities across the country. It's felt in Newark. Lives lost, injuries sustained, parents separated from their children, kids traumatized by these tactics and still not back in school, businesses that are shuttered. Colleagues, we still have not had a fair and unbiased investigation with state investigators into the killings of Renee and Alex. People who have done nothing wrong are still waiting for accountability in crowded courtrooms. Legal residents of this country are still being held illegally in detention camps hundreds of miles away from their families. Rent payments missed, businesses closed. Cities and counties spent their entire annual police overtime budgets to protect their communities. So I know that it is uncomfortable for my colleagues to hear all of this and that everybody wants to turn the page on this. But on behalf of Minnesota, I need to say out loud and to be clear that it is unacceptable that this legislative battle is happening tomorrow, because of the complete failure to agree to even the most basic guardrails on ICE, the same kind of guardrails that your local police department agrees to live by every single day. And, you know, Mr. President, I have to say I was hopeful because in the days and the weeks that Operation Metro Surge was unfolding, so many of my colleagues came up to me to offer their support. Many of you, both publicly and privately, said that what we are seeing in these videos are unacceptable and that we need to do something. When the former Secretary of Homeland Security declared that the Minnesotans shot and killed by federal agents were, quote, domestic terrorists, many of you came out and said that we need a full and fair investigation of what happened. We must have a transparent, independent investigation into the Minnesota shootings and those responsible, no matter their title. They must be held accountable. Who said that? Not me, but Senator Curtis. Here's another one. I support a full and impartial investigation into the events leading up to the deaths of Alex Preddy and his family. Law-abiding citizens exercising their Second Amendment right and the trust of the American people deserve a fair process. Who said that? Senator Crapo said that. We need a full investigation into the tragedy in Minneapolis. We need all the facts. We must enforce our laws in a way that protects the public while maintaining its trust. My colleague, Senator McCormick, said that. So what happened? Today, we have a partisan bill to send another $70 billion to ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. There has not been a full and impartial investigation. There have been no reforms to stop ICE from kicking down the doors of your home without a warrant. There is nothing to stop masked secret agents from pulling people out of their cars, following people home, grabbing parents away from their kids. Nothing to stop that from happening. There is nothing to help small businesses that were forced to close or school districts trying to help traumatized students. There's nothing to help teachers or parents or police departments who have the millions of dollars in overtime costs. Now, I will be filing an amendment to make sure that an investigation into Alex and Renee's death is done by the books, that it's fair and that it's unbiased and it's conducted jointly with state and federal investigators so that it has credibility in order to restore the public trust. And this is how these investigations have always been done in the past. But there won't be votes for that. My colleagues won't vote for that. So I want to be clear. I want to thank all of my colleagues who worked with determination and heart to negotiate common sense reforms to stop the worst of these abuses from happening ever again. And our asks weren't complicated. They weren't radical. We just wanted clarity that federal agents should follow the same standards as our local police departments. No random arrests or breaking down doors without a warrant or probable cause. Wear proper identification and body cameras. No masks. ICE needs oversight and accountability when they violate the rights of individuals as guaranteed in our Constitution. Basically, we're just looking for reforms that says ICE has to abide by the laws equally as they apply to every person in this country. And it is a shame that all of that hard work came to nothing because Donald Trump and Stephen Miller don't want accountability under the law. They want impunity. And let's be clear, this is really out of step with where Americans are. After months of this lawless behavior, Americans are strongly opposed. They've seen it. Americans are opposed to this. They're strongly opposed to this administration's domestic interior enforcement policy. 56% of Americans disapprove. And meanwhile, let's be honest about this. These abuses are continuing, though maybe without all of the public attention, not all of the public attention. Raids are happening in California, in Oklahoma, in Ohio, and elsewhere. We've seen what's been happening in Newark this past week. ICE pepper sprayed a U.S. senator outside a detention center in New Jersey just this past week, my colleague, Senator Andy Kim. 100,000 children are separated from their parents right now, today. 3/4 of them are estimated to be United States citizens, 100,000 kids. At least 33 people have died in ICE custody in 2025. Already in 2026, over 18 people have died. This is the best data that we have, though it's very difficult to get this information. That's one person who's lost their lives every 6 days. And many of this loss of life were under deeply concerning circumstances. We are denying life-saving care, life-saving medical treatment for transplant and for cancer patients. people that are detained by this federal government. Just today, I was working to try to get a humanitarian release for a woman who is suffering from an extreme health condition, who could lose her life if she does not get the care that she needs. The federal government is taking people hundreds of miles away from home and then turning them out on the street with nothing, no ID, no money, no papers, no way to get home. The truth is, this administration is still doing what it did in Minneapolis. They're just doing a better job of keeping it out of the news. So here we are today at a partisan impasse that Americans just don't understand, because for them, this isn't about politics, this is about common decency. Democrats stand strong, and we are demanding strong but basic common sense guardrails and accountability. We want our communities to be safe. We want our children to be able to walk to school without fear of being scooped up by a federal agent. We want people to be able to go to their jobs without fear that an agent is going to break their car window and drag them out of their car and onto the streets. But my Republican colleagues are saying no to this. In the face of crushing cost of living crisis in this country, where millions of Americans are struggling to afford their lives, Republicans' answer to this is to send $70 billion to ICE and Customs and Border Patrol for massive privately owned for-profit detention centers and a federal immigration police force with a budget that is several times larger than the FBI. You know, I don't know about your home state, but in Minnesota, $70 billion is a lot of money. And people are just not getting this. This is the priority that we have in this body today. I mean, that this is what we're choosing to do. We could take this money and lower health insurance premiums by extending the Affordable Care Act tax credits for 2 whole years. But no, we can't do that. We're told by our Republican colleagues that that's too expensive, but we can send $70 billion on top of everything that we've already sent to ICE and Customs and Border Protection. We could pay for Head Start preschool for 5 years, but no, we don't have money for that. We just have money for this. Why not update and repair or replace every drinking water or wastewater system in Minnesota, and then we'd still have more than $7 billion left over? That's a choice that we could make, but today and tomorrow, this body is making a different choice. No, Republicans are choosing to send billions of your tax dollars to ICE for a federal police force and for-profit detention centers with no reforms or guardrails. Not only that, but rather than address any of the challenges facing ordinary middle-class Americans, Republicans want to load up this bill with extra giveaways for billionaires and convicted felons, sometimes same category. They want an extra $1 billion of taxpayer dollars to pay for a ballroom. They wanted almost $2 billion in a slush fund. That has thankfully fallen out of this bill so far, but I want to know for sure that that's not going to happen. And if you're watching this and you're feeling confused about what's going on in this body, colleagues, I mean, you should feel, Americans, my constituents in Minnesota, you should feel confused, because this is outrageous. This is not how our democracy is supposed to work. And I mean, here's the thing. I actually believe that a lot of my colleagues on the Republican side are actually kind of embarrassed by this. They know it. They know that this isn't right, and they for sure know that it's bad politics. But that's not enough. We also need everybody in this body to not just say what they say behind closed doors, but to say it out loud in public. That is what our country needs right now. But here we are. And while Democrats may not be in power in the Senate, we are not powerless. So we will keep fighting, and we will keep preserving the Minnesota way, just as we did fighting Operation Metro Surge. We will double down on our love for our neighbors and unity in the face of this injustice, and we will keep fighting for a better country. We will not forget our neighbors, Alex and Renee and Liam and all the others that were so hurt by what happened in my home state. And we will keep up the fight, and we will vote no on this bill. Colleagues, today is your chance. This is the chance that we have to speak out with the eyes of history upon us. So I urge you to say no to this bill and to stand on the side of justice. Justice for Minnesota, justice for this whole country. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from California is recognized.
Mr. President, like the reconciliation bill before us, the past few weeks have been really eye-opening for the American public to see in plain view the clear priorities of President Trump and his allies here in Congress. It's increasingly clear that their top priority is not addressing the affordability crisis that's hurting so many families across the country, families who are struggling just to get by. The proposals, the actions of the Republican majority and the White House isn't trying to tackle the cost of health care. It's not trying to tackle the cost of housing. It's not reducing the price of gas, that's for sure, or addressing the increasing costs of groceries. The end result of the proposals before us continue to be personal gain for the president and those around him, plain and simple. But I don't think we should really be surprised by that. Don't take my word for it. We're talking about a political party and whose president, the leader of that party, who has said publicly, his own words, quote, "I do not care about Americans' financial situation," end quote. Let me repeat that. A president, leader of the Republican Party, who says, quote, "I do not care about Americans' financial situation," end quote. Doesn't get any clearer than that, folks, because whether it's a late night social media post or what he says in front of the cameras for everybody to hear, this president has no problem telling us exactly what his priorities are. And his priorities are clearly not Americans' financial situation. His priorities include an abomination of a ballroom that he wanted the American people to pay for to the tune of $1 billion, after repeatedly saying that it wouldn't cost a single taxpayer dollar, that it would be privately funded. Another one of his priorities is ensuring immunity for himself and for his family and shoring up support from his MAGA loyalists, including the January 6th insurrectionists who were prosecuted for violently attacking the Capitol, violently attacking Capitol Police. He was trying to advance a self-serving, corrupt slush fund to pay off his supporters. That's his priority. Here's another one, just from yesterday. Selecting an unqualified person, Bill Pulte, into an extremely sensitive position within our government as head of the Director of National Intelligence, whose track record leads us to see plainly their goal of interfering in our elections or politically pursuing anyone the president perceives as being an enemy. These are the president's priorities, colleagues, not helping working families. And as clear as day as he's outlined these priorities, there's no pushback by the Republican majority. They continue to enable every single one of these efforts. The ballroom, which is nothing other than a vanity project that never should have happened in the first place. It's a tragedy that the East Wing was torn down without a discussion, without the consultation with Congress that is clearly required. Yet for weeks, we heard Republican members of Congress parroting the lame excuse of for security reasons this was a necessary project, but they have nothing to say about A UFC ring being built on the lawn of the White House? Really? And by the way, what happened to the private donations that were supposed to be paying for the ballroom project? The president bragged about the $400 million, probably more, that he secured. So where is it? Where is that money? We have to remain vigilant that the ballroom project funding does not appear in this new reconciliation bill, or doesn't get worked its way back in. Now, while Acting Attorney General Blanche publicly stated yesterday that the so-called weaponization fund was not moving forward, it's really hard to take this administration at its word when they're constantly saying one thing and doing another, lies over and over to the American people. When we first learned about their plans to create this fund, I actually came to the floor and asked that this floor pass by unanimous consent my No Rewards for January 6th Rioters Act, which I introduced back in January to stop this proposal in its tracks. Trump already gave pardons to January 6th insurrectionists. Let's not give them payouts as well. So we must act to ensure that no one who attacked the Capitol, and especially those who assaulted law enforcement officers that day, can ever qualify for any kind of payout like this. And again, a few words on Bill Pulte, Donald Trump's pick to serve as acting director of national intelligence. It's clear that his only qualification, the only qualification that matters to President Trump, is blind loyalty to President Trump, a willingness to do whatever Trump asks. Now, time and again, we've seen Pulte use sensitive information in his role at the Federal Housing Finance Agency to target Trump's political opponents. Don't just imagine what he might do, imagine what he will do with the sensitive information at his fingertips in the office of the Director of National Intelligence, whether it's attacking opponents or finding new dangerous ways to advance Donald Trump's election corruption and efforts to take over, President's words again, to take over elections. Each of these is a misplaced and dangerous priority that Donald Trump puts over the needs of the American people. All these priorities do nothing to advance our national interest or improve the lives of working families across the country. So let's not allow ourselves to be distracted from the biggest of the misplaced priorities at the heart of this reconciliation bill. When I hear some of our Republican colleagues say, okay, no ballroom here, no slush fund here, they don't commit to not coming back to it in other efforts. They said, let's come back to the intent and core of what this reconciliation bill was at the outset. Billions and billions and billions of dollars more for ICE and CBP, for immigration enforcement, the same agencies that are still sitting on more than $100 billion of previously approved and appropriated funds that they can't even spend. What happened to fiscal responsibility? Instead of ensuring that money flows as agencies can spend it, they're trying to ram more money to these agencies while shielding them from oversight and accountability. Let me remind us all of the deaths of Americans like Rene Good, Alex Preddy, and Ruben Ray Martinez. Let me remind us of how this administration is using children like 5-year-old Liam Ramos as bait. Let me remind our colleagues about the price gouging that's happening. Mothers and children at Dilley Detention Center having to pay so much just to access clean water, and letting thousands of children languish in detention, jailing more than 6,200 children since the beginning of this administration. That's a shame. And now they want to shield them from more than 425 judges appointed by both Democrat and Republican presidents, including some appointed by Donald Trump himself, who have issued more than 10,000 rulings finding that ICE has violated the Constitution of the United States. That is not an exaggeration. More than 10,000 findings of ICE violating the Constitution of the United States, violating due process, and violating federal laws since the start of this Trump administration. 10,000 rulings. That's more than a 90% loss rate in court by this administration. This administration's immigration enforcement efforts have clearly not just been extreme and cruel, they've been unlawful and indefensible. What we should be doing, colleagues, is discussing, debating ideas on how to help American families better afford their groceries, how to better afford the gas that they put in their car because they have to get to work, helping American families afford their mortgage or the rent, how to pay for child care, how to pay for health care. So many Americans reeling from the Anything But Beautiful bill, from the expiration of the ACA tax credits, and so many Americans suffering from the experience of witnessing or having their children ripped from their arms with loved ones, family members, friends, neighbors, co-workers, disappeared to detention, many in the United States, many now in a foreign country. They're suffering through all that while still wondering how they're going to make ends meet at the end of the month. Those are the priorities for countless families across the country who are hurting and struggling right now that we should be focusing on. But instead, no. We're focusing on what this reconciliation bill offers in front of us. I've said it before. I think most folks at some point in this chamber have used the reference that budgets are a reflection of our values. A reconciliation bill is a budget bill. It too is a reflection of values and priorities. They reveal what we prioritize. They reveal what we stand for, what we fight for. And it serves as a guide to see if it truly reflects the needs and priorities of the American people or not. If you look at the language, if you look at the content of the reconciliation bill in front of us, it's clear that Donald Trump and our Republican colleagues have no interest in addressing the urgent needs of the American people. So I ask colleagues, let's reject this bill full of misplaced priorities. Let's actually regroup and put a bill together that will lower costs for American families, expand their opportunities, and help Americans get ahead. And I guarantee you, if we were to do that in good faith, you wouldn't have to resort to this party line, strictly partisan process of budget reconciliation. That would be something that would garner bipartisan support and be in the best interest of our country, our economy, and the needs of the American people. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
great senator from Alaska.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on the Judiciary be discharged from further consideration, and the Senate now proceed to S-Res 751.
The clerk will report.
SRES 751, designating May 2026 as ALS Awareness Month.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the committee is discharged, and the Senate will proceed.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I so appreciate this very important resolution advancing today. I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 9:30 a.m. on Thursday, June 4th, that following the prayer and pledge, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, morning business be closed, and the Senate resume consideration of calendar number 417, S2. Further, following leader remarks, Senator Merkley and Graham will be recognized for up to 5 minutes each, and upon use or yielding back of that time, all debate time on calendar number 417, S2 be expired.
Without objection, so ordered.
If there is no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order following the remarks of my Democrat colleagues.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Okay, under the previous order, the Senate stands adjourned until 9:30 a.m. tomorrow.